Hello there. When Boris Johnson appears, still cheers break out. Seriously. The members of the British Tory party who want to get an idea of the candidates for the successor to the outgoing Partygate Prime Minister in Cheltenham in England could first reminisce about better times. A video broadcast on large screens summarized the highlights of recent years, at least from the point of view of the Conservative Party. The overwhelming majority of 80 seats that Johnson gave them with his election victory 3 years ago, and it looks dozens of scandals later as if it from another age. But the old Boris enthusiasm flares up again easily there. It was not for nothing that he was considered to be without alternative in his ranks as a campaigner for a long time. And back in the here and now, the approximately 160,000 members of the Conservative Party have a choice these weeks. From whom do they want in times when more and more people can no longer pay their skyrocketing energy bills with a raging war in Europe and a drought in large parts of England? Who do they want to be governed by? Liz Truss, who, despite everything, promises immediate tax benefits or tax cuts and presents herself as a Margaret Thatcher of the 21st century? Or Rishi Sunak, former Chancellor of the Exchequer and now a self-declared man of uncomfortable truths, who first wants to bring inflation under check? Well, many have already made their decision. The rows of seats in Cheltenham were lined with determined people wearing Liz for Leader t-shirts or holding up ready for Rishi placards. If you ask those who were undecided, the trend is often in the direction of Truss, who has been way ahead in internal party polls for weeks. But Team Rishi doesn't want to admit defeat. It's hard to get rid of the Rishi stickers and flags. No, they say, although many people who have just arrived have turned down this offer by them. You could see this. I think many are still undecided, they say. There's still time to vote online or by post until the beginning of September. A doctor visiting there chose Sunak. He's the adult of the two. He doesn't pretend it's Christmas and it's time to give presents, he said. That's one vote there. But the southwest English county of Gloucestershire, which also includes Cheltenham, is one of the most prosperous areas of England. Still, it is the rising cost of energy and food that worries many there, followed by strong British support for Ukraine, which some would like to see continue, despite its impact on costs. The fact that outside the air-conditioned hall on the edge of a racecourse in Cheltenham, it was much hotter than has been the norm in Great Britain for decades, and that a drought has been officially declared for large parts of England, is hardly an issue inside the Tory base there. Instead, Truss blames climate change, water suppliers and defective pipes for the fact that many of her compatriots are no longer allowed to water their roses with a garden hose. She finds the sight of grain fields with solar parks on them sad and promises to change the rules as soon as possible. And there's still a lot of gas in the North Sea that has to be exploited. Yeah, tell that to Scotland. There's also little mention of the fact that child poverty is steadily increasing, particularly in the north of England, despite all the government's promises to equalise living conditions. Truss and Sunak spoke to an audience that was mostly older, white and mostly male these weeks. What counts is what resonates with this audience. Truss defends herself against doomsayers and assures at every opportunity that Great Britain's best days are still ahead of the country, although everybody's talking about a recession. Who has a clue of what's going on? It is the exception rather than the rule for someone to speak bluntly about the situation in which the United Kingdom finds itself in many respects. It's all the more striking when an elderly gentleman stood up and said, "It almost feels like nothing is working." Chaos at airports, train stations, ports, a lack of staff, the groaning economy, the overburdened health service, plus the heat. The list is endless, the man said. And Sunak promises to take care of missed appointments at the health service. Tories are less than 0.5% of the UK electorate, I guess it's 0.3%. But do you feel empowered to belong? No, this process would be the same for the Labour Party, and many dismiss that. The party chooses its leadership and the winner then becomes Prime Minister. But Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak must simultaneously court the party base and the electorate as they battle for leadership of the Tory party and also the kingdom. This balancing act leads to political contortions. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have a problem that shouldn't even exist, and that's energy. For a long time, Great Britain thought it was safe from the European energy crisis. In contrast to the EU, which gets around 40% of its gas consumption from Russia, the figure in the UK is only 4%. It seems all the more surprising that the energy crisis is now escalating earlier in the island kingdom than on the continent, and the two rivals for the chairmanship of the Conservative Party are finding it difficult to explain. And the reason for this is that Great Britain is also feeling the price pressure in the pipelines via the European supply network and the global gas market. The average UK household's energy bill could climb to more than £4,200 in January, according to the latest forecasts by market researchers Cornwall Insight. That would be double the figure for the previous year. And the opposition Labour Party is already warning that low-income households would then only have a choice between heating or eating. We've heard that for quite some time now. The British, known for their composure in times of crisis, react with displeasure. More than 40% of them fear social unrest in winter, and more than half consider a payment boycott of energy bills to be justified. You might have seen my yesterday's video. That was shown by a new survey by the opinion research institute Savanta. More than 100,000 Brits are said to have already joined the Don't Pay UK campaign. Politicians are reacting to the biggest economic crisis in the country in 50 years with panic mostly. The current Prime Minister Boris Johnson promises quick help, but wants to leave it to his successor. Sunak and Truss outdo each other almost every day with new suggestions. The former Chancellor of the Exchequer relies on targeted financial aid for poorer households. Until recently, the British Foreign Secretary rejected such government arms and prefers to help her compatriots in a conservative way. That means with tax cuts. And British Deputy Prime Minister and Sunak supporter Dominic Raab has described this as political suicide for the ruling Tories in view of the next general election. Other party members also accuse Truss of social indifference, and they are calling for emergency aid in view of an inflation rate heading for 13% and an impending recession. The Tories fear that the protests against high energy prices, like the tax boycott of Margaret Thatcher's poll tax in 1989, could lead to the fall of the government. Truss has now, softened her tough stance under public pressure, promising she will do whatever she can to help Britain struggling with a high cost of living. The fact that she is struggling with this is mainly due to her calculation of winning over the approximately 160,000 members of the Conservative Party who will elect a new party leader and thus also a Prime Minister by September 5th. And that's why she does this conservative election promises stuff. The electoral strategists assume that the Tory party base, unlike most Britons, favors tax cuts and a growth-oriented supply-side policy. But who are these almost 0.3% of the British population who decide on the next Prime Minister? As I said, they are older, wealthy, white Southerners, may be a bit of a caricature, but it's not that far from the truth. That's what Tim Baylor, political scientist at Queen Mary University in London, recently described the stereotypes like. The term Southerner suggests that more than 40% of the party base live in southern England, according to Bale. It must be added, however, that around 3/4 of the Tories are staunch Brexit supporters, which is why Truss and Sunak have not only announced a tough course in the dispute with the EU over the trade agreement or the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol, but also the City of London and they want to free the economy of the shackles of the old EU rules, the old crap we hear all the time. However, recent research shows that members of the Conservative Party may not be that different from the rest of the country. A study by the British think tank More in Common reveals that more than 40% of the Tories, or for more of the 40%, the high cost of living is currently the most important issue in the country. That doesn't mean, however, that party supporters agree on how the next Prime Minister should deal with the crisis. Truss has emphasized at each of the previous town hall events or the hustings that she wants to look for conservative ways out of the misery. However, when the favorite of the party's right wing recently suggested that civil service pay be differentiated by region according to the cost of living, she had to backtrack after a storm of protests from her own party friends in the northern parts of the country. The Conservatives' dilemma is that they are heavily reliant on the voters that they were able to attract in 2019 from former Labour strongholds in the north, the so-called Red Wall. Ideologically, however, the party is still committed to its arch-conservative base, which is predominantly anchored in the south of the country. While Sunak is less considerate of this and presents himself as the candidate of the conservative voters, Truss serves the more conservative wishes of the party base. This will probably win her the race against Sunak, but antagonize many Brits and might lose her the next general election. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.